The Tongass is an integral piece of this temperate rainforest that runs the length of the Pacific Northwest.
The one thing people don't understand is how big southeastern Alaska is. You can have a mine, you can have timber harvest, and you can still have millions of acres of wilderness. The logging industry was so large and so dominant for this region for so long. 50 years, it was the industry.
If there was a logging camp still going on like it was, I would live there until they dumped me off the dock. It was such a close-knit group of people that I can't even imagine a different lifestyle.
Well, loggers in general are just salt-of-the-earth, wonderful people.
They're fearless. They're in a very dangerous job, and the terrain out there is not conducive to a safe environment.
We were just like a family. I don't have any bad memories. They're all good.
Loggers, especially in Southeast Alaska, it's like being a cowboy in the West.
They're definitely a breed of their own.
Alaska has always been talked about as a big state. When you put Alaska draped over U.S., it goes from Florida to California. In all, the Tongass is about 17 million acres. Very little of it's been developed. It is the last remaining large intact coastal rainforest on the planet. And it's got every type of landscape you can imagine. It's one of the few places I ever worked where you go to work in the morning and you have to pay attention so something doesn't eat you.
The Tongass is different from other national forests that I worked on. It's mainly the weather, the water. On the Tongass here in Ketchikan, we get 180 inches of rain a year. But it's got a lot of recreation, it's got a lot of wildlife. About a third of it is ice and water and so forth. A third of it is something you would call non-productive timber, and a third of it is roughly timber that you could harvest.
The earliest logging, of course, took place here in support of other industries, primarily in support of mining and fishing. You created communities by chopping down trees and building pilings and building docks. And that was very valuable for the early loggers. In fact, a lot of Ketchikan developed that way because people basically headed out along Tongass Narrows and chopped down the trees that were right by the shore, and that created a little more land for development. The Ketchikan spruce mill, well, originally it was called the Ketchikan Power Company, started in 1903. It not only made boxes for the salmon canners, it made a lot of lumber to develop the community and build docks. They also generated power. That was the first power source for Ketchikan.
I worked at Ketchikan spruce mills when I was about 16, 17. The spruce mill, believe it or not, was located right down in the middle of downtown Ketchikan. And they had a big burner there. And of course, you can't do that now, but all their sawdust and stuff, it went up in a big burner. They had big log booms out in front. They had to shoot. They brought the logs up into the spruce mill.
It was a landmark for years and years with its teepee and the smoke billowing from it. And of course, the 5 o'clock whistle that the shift was over.
I grew up in Ward Cove, 7 miles north of Ketchikan. We did a lot of logging. It was all hand logging. But a lot of these trees here along this river that we cut, we didn't have any gas chainsaws or anything. It was all done by crosscut saws. A lot of guys, they'd go along the beach and they'd cut trees along the beach and they'd fall them in the water and pull them in with boats, you know, into different areas.
We moved the logs from the small jippos into the mill and also hauling fuel and groceries and everything to all them little Jippo camps.
Because it's all water related, we're all on the water. Everything was moved by water. You got acquainted with and knew everybody from the choker setter to the tugboat captain. So you knew everybody that you're involved with. The whole industry, it was a small community.
End of the logging game is how many logs you got at the end of the day. You know, it's like anything you work in piecemeal. I remember this one saw weighed 127 pounds, just a saw. And that guy carried that in, and then I had the other end from the bar. You know, that was real logging then, if you're using that equipment. So then I went to work, started climbing. Some of them, we'd use dynamite to shoot the top if the tree was dangerous. So you take a inner tube, fill it full of powder, take baler wire, you pull it up the tree and shoot it, and that way it'd blow the top out. But it really makes you hurry when it starts fizzing that fuse and come out of the tree, you know.
The loggers have a very dangerous job, but you know, there's no real safe jobs out in the woods. What we do, timber cruising and laying out roads and units, you're out there sometimes miles from anybody else, by yourself usually. You're going up over some very dangerous land situations, lots of rain, lots of brush, lots of steep hills, lots of bears, what have you. There's lots of difficulties. But it gets in your blood. When it's in your blood, it's there.
You like into timber cutting, that's one of the most dangerous sports there is. You're constantly on the guard. You cannot get hurt out here. There's a group of men, they keep coming up here every year. They all know one another. Something happens to one of them, it pretty much happens to all of us. I mean, that's how it is here. If you look in that camp, they're definitely a breed of their own.
It's pretty free lifestyle, and I think a good portion of the guys that through the years that came out, that was their whole incentive, was to get away and not have somebody just continually 5 to 9ing them. If they did their job, they could really do whatever they wanted when they were at camp. Even the bunkhouses, they were full of guns and fishing poles, and that's what they did to entertain themselves, and that's what they would have been doing if they were in some other area, but not with as much freedom, you know. It was a good life.
Living in a logging camp is intimate anyway because you know everybody. But living in a float camp, you're real close together, like living in a duplex or condominium. And the recreation is right, I mean, there's fishing right off the dock. It's quiet, no traffic, no cars. Gildersleeves had the biggest float camp, and they had probably 18 to 20 houses on floats.
They were built on great big, like, spruce logs, huge big spruce logs, because they last the best in the water, and they would lash them together. And then you'd have the ends were cross logs that would hold those all logs together, and then they would plank them over. And then, you know, when you were done with the logging operation, they had huge big anchors that would hold camp down. And our camp was probably the size of 3 football fields. It was just amazing. And when you were done logging, they would pull those anchors up and they would get a big boat to come out. When we moved from Grace Harbor all the way around to Polk Inlet, it was 300 and something miles. And they got one of the big Boyer tugs to come out, and it took a week or two. You know, you have to go with weather, and you would tow. You would tow that camp, you know, with people living in there, the generator going, and then you'd pull into this new place, and it was always so exciting to check things out, even though if you look at a lot of the inlets in Alaska, they all look pretty much the same, but there it wasn't. It was always such a neat adventure.
Not a whole lot of people tell you what to do. You don't have as many rules and regulations as you do in town. There's never a neighbor problem. It's a pretty close-knit little group. And if you made the guy you're working for happy, nobody else bothered you, you know? It's just kind of a free lifestyle. The kids even liked it. They all turned out to be pretty well-rounded, and by living in the camp environment, they learned how to take care of themselves, basically, how to be pioneers.
The reason I was at camp was because my parents moved there. My dad was a heavy-duty diesel mechanic for what ended up being 35 years. I really feel that I was meant to be there. And it was good to me. It taught me what I needed to know for what I wanted to do. Got to know boats and the wilderness and animals, and learn how not to panic when things are going wrong. And yeah, it pretty much trained me for the life that I led.
Ketchikan Pulp Company opened its doors in 1953. As the timber was being logged, the pulp logs were used for the pulp mill, and the good timber was used in the sawmills for sawmill logs. So it was a natural fit. The overripe trees went to the pulp mill. The good, fresh, new, young trees went to the sawmill for saw logs.
When the pulp mill came to Ketchikan, those were several hundred year-round jobs. It was a major impact on the community.
The pulp mill contributed hugely to the whole community in money, education, jobs.
At one point in time, there was 15 logging camps that were going in the area. We usually make a morning trip and an afternoon trip, and it was either parts or groceries that we'd have to fly in there. It was a pretty neat era. They developed a relationship with the cooks. We knew when it was 5 o'clock. Anytime there was food, pilots they knew where all the kitchens were on all the camps. And they pretty much welcomed us on, everywhere we went. I mean, come on in, have some cookies, have some coffee, and a lot of times there was a lot of standby, so that's where we always stood by, was in the kitchen.
You don't have a crew if you don't have a good cookhouse. If you don't put out good food, they don't come back. They call for the next plane and they're gone to one that has a good cookhouse.
I'll tell you one thing, a lot of the tugs would go 20 miles out of the way to come by and eat our pies and cakes. We lived right at camp. Juanita and I would stay in the wintertime and be camp watchmen.
Year-round, we lived there. When the season was over and winter came, everybody left and went to town, and we stayed at the camp. We had a good time out there. Loved it.
The children, they liked hunting and fishing. They didn't need to be maintained. Just had to make sure they came home on time. It was kind of a community effort, keeping everybody entertained and safe.
The school was the center of the community. The entire community would come to it for concerts or We had the first phone in camp that they could use when the satellites came up, and so they'd come after school and ask if they could use the phone for $1 a minute. You could always tell when people were on your float or coming by because, the float sank with their weight. And on the first Gildersleeve camp, our trailer was on the playground. So every night while we were eating dinner, we were bouncing with the swings of the kids, and then the riding their bikes around there. And on the float camp, if you hadn't passed the swimming test, the kids had to wear their life jackets. So they'd all tromp over to school and come into the entryway and hang up their life jackets and sit down and start the day. Ketchikan remained a hub, sort of, where everybody came in to get their stuff, to get their groceries.
Well, during the heyday of the logging here in Ketchikan, Ketchikan was hopping. It was year-round. There was 56 bars or liquor licenses in this town at one time, and you could literally walk block to block from each bar for most of the town.
I liked it. I liked that energy that was here. I liked that sort of frontiersy, wild kind of feeling. It was pretty crazy. It was very different from what it is now. This place was always pretty much rocking.
The bar stayed open till 5 in the morning and pretty much opened back up at 6 in the morning. Back in those days. They worked very hard and they played very hard.
There must have been about 20 men to every woman.
I know when I first came here, the first bar I ever came to was this actual bar. And I was amazed at the amount of men, and it was dead winter. You would actually have to push on the door, and then once you got inside, it'd just be a sea of men, and you'd be like, "Hello, boys."
Everything was going on. There was money everywhere, so everybody was busy. That, in turn, led to all the other service industries that go with it. It was just huge. For a little bitty 10,000, 12,000 community, it was really a huge community. Everybody owned a boat, everybody owned an airplane. You could have whatever you want because there was lots of work, Like I said, you could quit. You could quit at least 2-3 jobs a week and never run out, never miss a day's work.